Hey all, how's it going, everybody? It's good to see people hanging out, ready to talk about some stuff. I was just telling the chat here a second ago that we are going places tonight. We got some we got some stuff to talk about, and we got some questions that are going to lead to some things. Um, yeah, so let's get to it. Before we get to questions, just want to say a little bit about the bourbon talk thing and doing this and having these conversations and these live streams. There have been times where we were looking at elections and these crises, such as following the 2020 election, where we would do these pretty regularly, like once a week, and um, really spend some time getting into the minutia of it and talking about these things and going through them together. Uh, you know, and then there have been these moments, and this is where it's been a little bit. It's kind of hard just to go ahead before we get into things, like to pull the curtain back a little bit. It's always hard to do these types of things, appearances or speeches or presentations, um, because sometimes it's easier than others, and you get into the flow of things. And then there are other times where, like being an analyst or somebody who talks about these things and gets into them, it feels strange because it's like you can understand like political and socioeconomic things, and you can have the background and the information and stuff, and at the same time as you feel like you have some answers, you you don't feel like you totally understand your own life or what's going on in the world around you. So sometimes it's a weird, hard thing. And so it's a strange thing to come out here and talk about stuff and have these communal occasions and conversations. But I just want to say, first and foremost, I always appreciate them. And I just want to say cheers to the people who come to these things and are kind to each other and ask questions and are interested in actual answers to things and getting into what's happening in the world and what's happening in reality. And cheers to that. This is ooh, that's good. That's a good bourbon tonight. I mean, it's always good bourbon, but let's hit in the spot right now. Um, it's just a strange thing. Being a public figure wasn't something that I was necessarily going out to look for, and it's a strange thing to deal with. And there's like a lot of guilt that comes with that. Um, I've got like all these people in my family who like punch the clock. They're working in like factories and mines and prisons and putting their lives on the line every single day, and like those aren't those aren't things that people like call in because the existential dread or you name it. And it's a hard thing cataloging this stuff. We're going to talk tonight a little bit about framing and perspective and how we approach these things, like literally how we as individuals approach them and deal with both worsening conditions, but also if we understand this stuff, if we're having conversations like this one, if we're having a conversation where we're talking about, the possibilities down the road and things that could happen and things that are occurring. And sometimes things feel very large. And those those understandings are really, really helpful so that you're not like swimming upstream against something and not understanding what you're doing or not being able to um put it into a perspective that helps you or makes any type of sense. I was talking to Sarah Kinzier on the podcast. I think it was last week, and it's one of those things where you understand why people embrace cultish ideas. I mean, I grew up in an extreme evangelical background, and I'll tell you, it is it's a hard thing to move beyond those stories and some of those those mythologies and stuff and to like sit with them. And so, on one hand, we're going to talk about what's going on in these. We have a ton of questions today and a wide range of questions. Again, I was saying we're going to go places like there's some stuff we have to talk about tonight that is different and multifaceted, and it's building off of what we've talked about. And when I approach this stuff, whether it's the Bourbon Talks, or whether it's the Muckrake podcast, or the Substack I do, or the books that I write, I as a teacher, I try and build off of those things. You start with like a base of knowledge, and then you start to grow and you expand and you go into like specific places with it as you sort of build the scaffolding. Like, there's a lot of stuff that is going on right now because this conversation that we've been having now for years, like, because this is getting more complicated and weirder by the day, like the old ideas, because what we're talking about, of course, is deep politics here. We're talking about how something in the past that wouldn't have made any type of sense to us is now something that we have to like sit with and wrestle with and really start to piece together. And while we piece that together, and while we come to an understanding of what we're doing and what's occurring around us, we have to also start talking about how we process this stuff. What do you do with this information that we're dispensing here? Where do you take it? And in the past, we've talked about like telling your friends, telling your family, telling your community, those types of things. And it always comes down to the idea of solidarity and finding these connections. And that's one strategy for it. But also starting to grasp the idea of deep politics. And again, deep politics is like underneath these conventional understandings, right? Like these passion plays with heroes and villains and sort of the stuff that's like ready for made for TV. Once you start getting into the deeper politics of the things that cause this, the trends, the trajectories, the material conditions, the cycles of politics and economics, and philosophy, when you start building off of all that, you have to start to change the way that you approach the world writ large, because the world writ large relies on those conventional ideas to form that basis of information. We're forming a completely different foundation and a completely different basis. So a lot of weird stuff that we got to talk about tonight, and I am just so glad that you are here. And we're gonna start in a weird place. So first things off, cheers. I hope things sound good. I'm using fancy mic. I'm using podcast mic, which I've never done for one of these. Our Wi-Fi is good to go. We feel good. We think this is working so far. Hopefully sounds good. All right. Let's go ahead and start somewhere different. This is from Janet. And Janet says, a friend of mine has an ARC, which is an advanced reading copy, by the way, of The Midnight Kingdom, and won't stop raving about it. Very kind. Thank you. I can't wait to read, but I was wondering if you could talk about the Protestant Reformation. It's kind of an obsession for me, and I was hoping you could tell us how it has influenced, well, almost everything. So let's go ahead. And before we get into what's happening right now, let's go ahead and go real deep into the past and talk about the foundations of how things have occurred, how we've arrived at this moment. And on top of that, because this is going to be important in the larger context of what we're talking about tonight. And a lot of the stuff, a lot of the things that you've asked and a lot of the questions that have come in, they share this sort of common thread or a common theme. And I want to go ahead and start with this. So the Protestant Reformation, when I say that to you, obviously the first thing that occurs if you've had any exposure to this, you think about Martin Luther pounding up the theses on a church door. Next thing you know, all hell breaks loose. Cats, dogs living together, mass hysteria. People are splitting off from the Catholic Church. That's how maybe you and your family ended up on church on a Sunday, right? Well, first things first, Protestant Reformation, it's actually really fascinating. Um, Martin Luther would not have had the sway that he somebody, by the way, in the chat wrote bloodshed, which absolutely, and we're going to get there in a second. So Martin Luther comes around at a certain time where all of a sudden the printing press is this, new invention, and it starts making the possibility of a new reality. If you want to go ahead and put it into a proper modern context, think about social media, think about the internet, right? We have these moments of technological advancement that suddenly, because there's a technological advancement, suddenly a new future becomes possible, right? Because it disrupts the status quo. Whenever Martin Luther starts to challenge the Catholic Church is like a hegemonic influence, right? Not only do they determine the orthodoxy of the Christian religion, which means if you don't belong to it, they can go out, particularly in certain countries and regions, and not only are they going to question you in inquisitions, but they can torture you, they can kill you, they can take everything from you. It is an authoritarian power that is overarching. And what's more, it's overarching in a way that it's, obviously, in Rome. And because it's in Rome, like, all of a sudden you have Martin Luther and people in Germany who are like, "What the hell does this have to do with me?" So you have the rise of the nation state. And as that starts to happen, you start saying, "Well, it shouldn't just be in Latin. Why isn't the Bible in German? Why isn't the Bible in English?" And people who would translate the Bible into these other languages, they would be tortured and killed or excommunicated. Their entire lives sort of wiped away from history. But when the printing press makes it possible for Martin Luther, and he was basically like, a viral sensation. Like there, I found this in the book as I was researching it. Like there's at some point where like like the vast majority of all printed materials in Germany were Martin Luther tracts. Well, when that happens, everyone's like, "Yeah, absolutely. Let's go this route. Let's start having like some nationalism, right? Let's start having a religion that has to deal with us." But here's the thing. The aspects of Protestantism, and of course it leads to war, it leads to genocide, it leads to so much bloodshed, which by the way inspires future liberal revolutionaries such as the founding fathers of the United States of America or the French revolutionaries. That inspires them to say, we need to get religion out of this. And we need to create a liberal secular state with a division between religion and us. And we need to do that soon because they are murdering people in the street left and right. We're talking about roving bands of murderers just killing people and having like festivals to celebrate the bloodshed. So, as that's happening, here's an important thing. And Martin Luther wasn't thinking about this, Martin Luther wasn't considering this. As Protestantism and as this Reformation is starting to take place, we're watching the movement from feudalism to capitalism. And by the way, that liberalism that spreads around the world that moves religion out of the context of government, that's not a coincidence. Those things go hand in hand. And as Protestantism comes around, I want to point this out, and hopefully this will start to make a little bit of sense here in just a second. Catholicism was absolutely important, vital, integral to feudalism. And here's the reason why. It was the gravity that held everything together. The Lord, who you worked for, if you were a peasant or you were a laborer, you would swear on God. You would go ahead and say, "Okay, I promise to carry out this contract that you and I have based on God." That's how that's occurring right there. And on top of that, here's the entire point, and here's where feudalism versus capitalism, they start to this is one of the reasons we have the issues that we have now. Feudalism is about just making enough food and extracting enough resources for us to make it through the winter. Tell me if that sounds familiar. You are just making sure that you can make it through the winter without dying. That's your entire point. Eventually, you reach a point where, Well, you have more than enough to make it through winter, and you have to start moving it around to where, you can sell this and make money off of the excess material that you have. Well, guess what Protestantism does? Because Catholicism tells you right now you are just trying to make it to your death. And if you go ahead and honor your contracts and you just go ahead and just you honor your vows to God, right? And as somebody's saying, you stay in your place in society. You have your duty, you stay in your place, you listen to the people who are born higher than you. If you do that, guess what? And I know that life isn't great. Life sucks. Life is just a toil. But if you do all right, if you make it to the other side, if I don't know, you pay the church, you take care of your lords, you might be rewarded with everlasting life in the heavenly kingdom. That's exciting, right? Oh man, your life absolutely sucked and you never expected anything better. And there was no way for you to move up the ranks. The people were born into their ranks. But when you die, maybe something's waiting on you. Protestantism, because of the birth of nations and nationalism and this sort of pushback against the Catholic Church, all of a sudden it says, you're living on the earth and maybe it's not the worst thing in the world for you to make money. And maybe within this system, you can move up a little bit, or maybe you fall if things fall apart a little bit. But you even might be able to find a little piece of heaven on earth. And if you make money, if you go ahead and start acquiring some stuff for yourself, that might give you a little bit of a sign. Guess what? God's looking out for you. They have decided that this was a matter of heaven on earth. You could go ahead and make money on this earth and move forward and move around excess capital and materials. And somebody said that, that Luther was not trying to buck feudalism. Absolutely not. It was an unintended consequence of what Luther was trying to do. Matter of fact, as people started uprising, they said, "Oh my God, look at what Martin Luther has given us! Like the church is terrible to us. We should rise up and throw off our masters and create equality." And he said, "Oh my God, no." Kill those people over there who want equality because that was never the intention. It was never about liberty or equality or freedom. We currently, and this is, I've been throwing around the word consensus a lot lately because this is an important thing to remember. A consensus is where the larger structure of the world has one idea of how the world works or how it should work, right? This is the reality we agree on. And if you are outside of that reality, that is the consensus reality, well, either you don't have any power or you might need to go to jail or an asylum or something along those lines. In all of this, you'll notice that when you go from feudalism to capitalism, you still have the hierarchy, but you still have the idea that maybe life will get better. And maybe the conditions that you live in are going to get better. And maybe you can climb up this ladder of the meritocracy. Guess what? The meritocracy was absolute bullshit all the time. That hereditary power and wealth, that continued under capitalism. It just so happened that it went under money and property, right? As it moved away from the church. The moment that we're in now is a moment where the promises of capitalism, the promises of liberalism, and by the way, I'm talking about historical liberalism. I'm not talking about Democrats versus Republicans because up until recently, both Democrats and Republicans were technically historically liberal. The problem is now there's a pushback against liberalism. Liberalism as a consensus, as the way that the world works and everything that is created from global capitalism, liberal representative democracy, the idea of the meritocracy, those things right now are in incredible danger. And listen, is it a coincidence that we are in another era where a brand new mode of communication, and these things always happen, the printing press, you have television, you have the radio, now you have social media. These things always lead to uprisings. Like the Nazis could not have become the Nazis if it wasn't for radio. Like that's one of the things we don't get taught enough is that a large part of that was sort of the effects of radio and mass communication over areas. Newspapers, the same. Newspapers played a huge role in the rise of liberal democracy and these liberal revolutionaries. We are in another moment where this technology is happening. We're in another moment where the consensus that everyone has is starting to fail. Liberal democracy, or liberalism as the consensus has been since the 18th century, that's in real trouble. And on top of that, notice something. Under liberalism, under capitalism, the idea was, don't worry, we're going to create a heaven on earth. We're going to have excess resources, excess materials. Everybody can get a hold of this and everyone's going to be okay. And guess what? You're not just going to survive winter, you're going to thrive. You don't have to worry about the elements or getting clean drinking water or any of that. Notice how that's shifted. The people who are pushing a liberalism are pushing the idea of you should not expect your life to be okay. Matter of fact, your life is going to be so bad. And that's just part of it. That's part of your duty. That is part of what God wants you to do. God wants you to suffer. And by doing that, you're actually carrying out your relationship by God. Maybe in the afterlife, you'll get your heaven. You'll get something good. But you shouldn't expect the government to take care of you. You shouldn't expect conditions to improve. What needs to happen is you need to recognize the people who are your superior, the people who are above you on a hierarchy. And by the way, you guessed it, that is all based on hereditary white supremacist bullshit. So the entire point of this is that we're in this moment where things can change. They can change for the better. The question is, what is that better thing? How do we get to it? And it happens through stories. Martin Luther gave a story that challenged the official sort of orthodox narrative, and it created the possibility for things to change in a massive way. And they did. And they changed in a massive way because conditions were ready for them, and technology at the time had created the avenue for those things to happen. We could find something like that. We could find an alternative to this completely unequal, awful thing that we're in the middle of. It doesn't mean that we need to roll back the clock and go back to feudalism. It doesn't mean that we need to go back to the point where you have an overarching orthodoxy that is enforced through authoritarianism and violence and oppression. We have to move forward, not backwards. So that's the big thing happening there. And by the way, I'm glad that your friend is liking the book. It's crazy how these things just keep happening. It's whenever those official stories, they start getting challenged, that there's like a possibility for change. So there we start. We start with the Protestant Reformation. So Jana, I hope your friend continues to enjoy the book. On that note, Lisa Ross says, please address Putin's current nuclear threats and your thoughts. Looking forward to it. Thank you for having Bourbon Talks. And yeah, thank you, Lisa, for the question and tuning in. So here's bad news. We are closer to nuclear war than we have been in a very long time. That's just the truth of it. I wrote an article about this. God, I want to say last week. It's hard to keep track of time. When you mix the nuclear age with undemocratic situations, when you have a dictator who has no actual democratic support, who has no actual popular support, and the only way that he can maintain power is through threats and actual violence and the ability to disappear his enemies. That's a bad situation. And one of the things that we've created in all of this with mutually assured destruction, and all of these people who like to pat themselves on the back, for, oh, you don't like nuclear weapons? Like, these are essential. This is what keeps the peace. What a crock of shit. Holy God. Go outside, breathe some air, look at a bird or two. Good God, these realists that are always just so happy that we have weapons that are capable of destroying the human species and the world. Absolutely insane. I keep saying, on the podcast when Nick and I talk about this, that the question is, will Putin be able to maintain his stranglehold within Russia? Because everything that he does at this point is self-serving. And if enough oligarchs come up against him, like, there's a possibility he, I don't know, might fall out a window. I hear that happens a lot in Russia. Um, I gotta tell you right now, I think what worries me the most is twofold. One, it's the fact that we as a human society, we are so distracted, and we are yeah, we're gonna talk about Lula here in a second. Um, we are so distracted that we can't even focus on threats that could possibly end the species and life as we know it. We can't do it. It's impossible. We can't possibly um mass our attention for even a second to like really start to wrestle with these kinds of things. That's disturbing as hell. And one of the things that keeps bothering me as I watch what's going on. And by the way, like you're watching this talk tonight or on YouTube or whatever, that tells me and I was talking about this with, some of the Muckrake podcast Discord people the other day. If you're listening to this, if you're reading my books, if you're involved in these conversations, that tells me that you're probably somebody who doesn't look away from this stuff and you wanna understand it. I always sort of give the explanation that one of the reasons why I do what I do is because I'm the type of person I don't particularly like flying, be honest with you. I've been in too many bad flights. It's never been my favorite thing. Not my jam. But I'll tell you what helps me. What helps me to fly is to understand how the plane works. And like it helps me to understand like how planes actually fly and what turbulence is and to be frank what causes planes to crash. So as a result, I'm a different type of person. There is a reason why I am an analyst who is focusing on rising authoritarianism and possible societal and political crises. Chances are you probably are as well. That's one of the reasons why we're doing this tonight. And on that note, cheers. But I think for a lot of people, it's not just political, it's not just societal. I think a lot of people are really, really frightened to start looking at how things work because it makes them consider things and it makes them uncomfortable and sometimes that overwhelms them. There's the one thing of two that really, really bother me about all of this. Second is that if we're heading in the direction towards authoritarianism, widespread, and not just in Russia and Hungary, I mean, we're talking the major Western powers. We're talking about some of these places that we've been told were completely and utterly incapable of ever falling to the wayside with authoritarianism. Like, to have nuclear weapons on that front, because here's the reason why authoritarianism spreads. It's not just telling people, hey, the reason why things are so bad is that enemy over there, I'll take care of them. The inherent belief and the inherent motivations within authoritarianism, it cannot live peacefully because it is about using myths of nationalism, myths of martyrdom, just absolutely deranged logic about struggle and death and suffering as the main bonds of society, as opposed to making a better life, which goes back to what we were talking about in terms of the schism between Catholicism and Protestantism. That belief, that energy, it leads to war. Period. It leads to war. That's it. And you have to go to war because you have to go ahead and get the resources and get the materials that your country needs. Because you're a special country, because nationalism says there's something inherently special about you. And if all of a sudden you live in a world of dwindling resources, and what's happening right now is that global capitalism, globalism, if you will, that massive global infrastructure, it's starting to fall apart and it's starting to wind backwards. And if all of these nations are retreating to nationalism and authoritarianism, that leads to war. World wars don't happen just because there's a charismatic leader and he thinks that he needs that land. That's not how it works. Wars are over resources. Wars are over resources. And the reason why you have major world wars is because something challenges the order as it is. World War One has Germany, which becomes an empire, wanting more resources. So as a result, they start challenging the major powers to sort of shake things up and hopefully catch some more resources and territories. World War Two happens after Germany reacts to its failures before and decides it wants to reorder the world so that there are more resources and territory for them. War is about resources. In the past, it was much more about like personalities clashing against one another, armies on battlefields at the behest of kings, who were all just like second cousins. And occasionally they would go to war, not even knowing why they were doing it. Modern wars are about intentional understanding of resources and getting them for your people through nationalism. In the past, my God, you had all kinds of wars over materials and resources where the people had no clue what they were doing. It's actually kind of crazy. But these things just continue to happen. So you throw nuclear weapons into that, you throw nationalism, international tensions, and a breaking world order. That's bad. And if you look at what's happening with Putin right now and what is happening with Russia and Ukraine and these continuing threats and continuing escalation, if this thing keeps getting worse, and there's no reason that it wouldn't under current conditions with people not really pushing for alternatives, even though I think that they will, that's a bad road. And this isn't going to be something like we're not going to say, man, do you remember how weird that was? We're going to look at this and say, holy shit, like that was the beginning of a trend. That was the beginning of where this thing was going. And that would be a calamity on a scale that like I don't even know that we could really wrap our heads around. The stuck Suez ship. Nice name. Remember that? The ship that was a crazy couple of days and just messed up everything. Just messed up global shipping in an incredible way. Man, it's wild that people look at all these systems and they're like, no, these are perfect. They can never be changed. They can never possibly change. So bizarre. The stuck Suez ship says, I hope it's okay if I ask this, but are you a Marxist? I ask in a supportive way because I think Marx nails so much, and I've noticed in the past few years you're kind of, and again, I say this respectfully, radicalized, which is awesome in my opinion. Anyway, yeah, rock on. Love these. Well, first of all, thanks for that, and thank you for the question. So here I've talked about this a little bit. Somebody asked me to comment on the grocery store robots with googly eyes. I don't know if you've seen this. Nick told me about it on the podcast, and somebody sent me Carmichael sent me a picture of it the other day on social media. I had never seen the grocery store robots. I hate them. I absolutely hate them. I hope they go away and that they'll never come back. I had a robot deliver me sushi the other day. There was no reason for it. Absolutely no reason for it, except for, to take somebody's job, which leads me into the question. Am I a Marxist? So I've addressed this in the past. I will say this. I think that Karl Marx had an incredible critique of capitalism. I think he understood it on a level that was absolutely incredible. And Marxist studies that have built off of that are very, very accurate in terms of what capitalism would do, what it would mutate into, and the conditions that it would create and carry out. Um, I think, and here's the thing: in America, obviously Marx was persona non grata. We turned it into a dirty word, even though, like serious, political scientists and thinkers and economists all understand that Marx has a lot to offer in every conversation about politics and culture and society. It's really crazy that you can go like an entire education without getting a fundamental dive into Marx and Marxist thought. And uh, I mean, it's actually hurt America because I was talking about this the other day too. you have so many leading economists and political figures who just absolutely are, like, in the dark about what Marx said and what Marxism is, and as a result, they turn it into their own boogeyman. So on that note, here's where I come in. I think Marx was right in his diagnosis of how capitalism worked and how it would mutate and how it would change. I don't consider myself a Marxist because I think that limits a person's ability to think about things. Like, I don't like roll my eyes when someone says that they're a Marxist, but I am trying very hard to create my own theories about how things work and my own analysis. But also on top of that, Marxism believed that capitalism obviously would destroy itself and that there would be a dictatorship of the proletariat. Part of what has happened, and this is a thing that is important in all of this, we have been so changed by capitalism as a species. The way we view the world, the way we view ourselves, the way that we take information in and look at it. In America, particularly, um, you have like a lumpen proletarian that doesn't believe that it's working class. You have a middle class that believes it's either working class or that it's an upper wealth class. Like, we are such a weird, screwed up thing, and that's not by accident. That was absolutely a means of, carrying on the market by making sure that people were spending outside of their wealth. I've seen it myself. I've seen one person after another that I know and I care about who, spent money on things that they couldn't afford simply because it was about proving to themselves and people around that they themselves were part of a class that they weren't a part of. On top of that, the bonds of solidarity that are supposed to create the conditions to destroy capitalism and bring about communism, those are gone. Those have been so effectively severed and destroyed. Dennis says bowling alone. Absolutely. Like, capitalism and neoliberalism have absolutely fractured and atomized us in a way that, like, I don't know that anybody could have possibly seen back in Marx's time. Like, it's crazy. It's literally crazy. So I don't know if we're looking even at a possibility. Like, I don't think that the proletariat, if you can even call them that anymore, I don't think that they're capable of a dictatorship because they don't see themselves through that lens. They don't see the world through the idea of class struggle. Like, there are elements to it, Like, I come from poor people, and they see themselves as being screwed over left and right, but they have sort of been taught in a way to go ahead and, yeah, you're being screwed from above. That means you need to screw people below. So I don't know completely what the answer is, which is another reason it's hard sometimes to come on here and do this and offer my own analysis and my own ideas because I can't necessarily tell you exactly what form this stuff is going to change or what it's going to take moving forward. But no offense asking that. I mean, I think to just dismiss Marx out of hand, I think is dangerous, even if you're a capitalist. I mean, capitalists should understand Marx. Like, why would you not? Like, if you have a theory and you have a worldview, you owe it to yourself and you owe it to your worldview to challenge it with opposing worldviews, to at least understand where the criticism is coming from. That's the only way you get better. It's nuts to go ahead and say, "Oh, I have nothing to learn from Marx. I don't need to read Marx." That's crazy. That's absolutely nuts. And you go ahead and you take a look, and it was funny. Like, it was God, it was months ago, right? You had um, I think it was the general, and the general was saying, I read CRT. I want to know what it has to say. I read Marx. I want to know what it has to say. My God, of course, you should. You absolutely should. Like, you should test your worldview to see where its limitations are and where it can get better. It's absolutely insane to, you should be out there reading all kinds of stuff. You should be seeing what it is that people have told you not to read. So yeah, there's that. Nick, okay, you ready for this? This is an interesting. Well, unions were vilified because it was the idea of look at the union people over there; they're getting what you don't have, and as a result, it created cultural back and forth that disrupted the unions, and that was an amazing project that was carried out by the wealth class. They did a hellacious job. They deported the true leftists in the country. The remaining labor unions, they bought off a lot of their bosses and went ahead and incorporated them in the national project, and then they just screwed them in the long run like nobody's business. Okay, so here's a question, and we're gonna get into this, and I told you we're going places. We're going places. Nick, this is a very niche thing, but can you get into, and here's the term, maybe you've heard about it, maybe you haven't, MAGA communism. MAGA communism. That it's sweeping the world. Its specter is haunting small businesses with people who have private jets. I don't know. I've been low key hoping to hear your take since it came up a few days ago. So, MAGA communism is this idea that is now it's spreading throughout the internet, and there's a couple of different strands of it that is taking place. Let's go ahead and define two things. All right, let's go ahead and define two things. First things first. MAGA is a faux populist, and faux populist means it has some of the markers of a populist movement, like mass participation, sort of key factors that bring the people together, that they identify together as a group. It's a faux populist grift, by the way, because it never at any moment was meant by Donald Trump or the people around him to actually go ahead and create some sort of a working class movement. But it is a faux populist nationalist movement. There is no such thing as nationalism within communism. Communism is the idea that you're going to move past the nationalist state in order to have a worldwide reality where where capitalism has been gotten rid of, private property is gone, and the fall of the nation state is absolutely key in that. So first of all, tons of contradictions in that. But a couple of things are taking place here in all of this. And these are things, and again, like there's a lot of absurdity here. And if you actually read Marx or if you read Lenin or you read any of these people, like it's absolutely insane. The idea that there's such a thing as MAGA communism. The entire idea is based on a couple of deals here. One, it is part of a post-left movement. And when we're seeing a lot of this right now, you're actually starting to see a lot of people who consider themselves socialist, democratic socialist, leftist, whatever, who are in places like New York City, where, maybe they supported Bernie Sanders for a while, but then they said, there's no way possible for the Democratic Party to reform. Things are sort of like, almost a nihilistic sort of a thing. And then they look at what is going on with MAGA, and they're sort of excited about the fact, and this is something I've talked about at length, so let's just go ahead and reiterate it. The Democratic Party and a lot of their supporters are not offering an alternative to the status quo. The Democratic Party has become the guardian of the status quo. They are the ones who say our institutions need to be refortified because there's a threat against them, right? And it's not a time to change anything. It's not a time to move forward and do something different. We have to dig our heels into the ground and save the status quo as it is, which I always say is one of the biggest mistakes and misunderstandings of the current moment, and it's incredibly dangerous. We'll get to more in a second. So they go ahead and they look at the right. And the right now, particularly through MAGA and through this national conservatism, they are offering multiple different types of answers. On one hand, they are so further right than the Democratic Party, right? They're talking about true natural hierarchies. They're talking about hereditary power. They're talking about getting rid of democracy in order to reinstate old orthodoxies like the ones we were talking about. But on the other hand, they have figured out that there is room to the left of the Democratic Party because the Democratic Party isn't talking to people who want to get back into redistribution of wealth or New Deal style programs that would go ahead and um, that would make sure that we have a social safety net. The Democratic Party isn't interested in that right now because they are in the middle representing um, wealth, more or less, which is one of the main problems that we have at the moment. So the Republican Party is at times, and they don't mean any of this. They're to the left of the Democratic Party in their appeals. They're lying. They don't mean it. When Donald Trump would talk about like what happened with NAFTA and free trade, he didn't mean it. He didn't really plan on bringing jobs back, good jobs. But now this new authoritarian movement includes some really wild ideas that are stolen from ideas of Marx, Lenin, communism, you name it. There is the idea that you can reframe, you can pull back from global capitalism, that you can go ahead and move back into nationalism, and you can start taking care of some people. And in the American minds, this is something we don't like to talk about very much. We've been engaging in socialism for a very long time. I know it's shocking. We've been making sure, that people can retire, which they're going to try and get rid of that. They're going to try and kill Social Security. We've been making sure that certain farmers stay in business, even if they're not selling their goods enough to keep them in business, particularly white farmers. In a way, what national conservatives and authoritarians are promising, and they only mean this to a certain extent, what they're promising is communism or socialism for white people. It's the idea that we will protect you, white people. We will make sure that you don't lose your standard of living. We will make sure that you'll be able to retire. We'll make sure that you have a social safety net. But we don't have enough resources for everybody, right? So only a few people, the majority of the country, are actually going to suffer, right? It's going to be people of color. It's going to be gay and trans people. It's going to be women. It's going to be immigrants. Those people, they're the ones who aren't going to have socialism, right? It'll be for the white people. But here's the thing. They don't mean it for the white people either because they're not actually interested in their base. What they're actually interested in doing is selling them something that will get them support, that will tide them over. And then over the course of time, what's going to happen is that the wealth class, that white, wealthy, patriarchal class, those people are going to get unbelievable amounts of power and wealth. They're going to go ahead and get rid of all the parts of liberalism that they hate, including multiculturalism, cosmopolitanism, individual rights and freedoms, and even the idea of the individual. That's what they're going to get rid of. And then they're going to go ahead and install a new orthodoxy. And the new orthodoxy, going back to the first question of the live stream, they're going to create a new orthodoxy that says, hey, don't expect a heaven on earth. You're not possibly going to climb up to a new level. That's maybe some of you will. Maybe if you kiss enough ass and maybe if you, lick enough boots, if you're willing to go to war for us and, kill some other people and carry out, genocidal and terroristic acts, maybe at some point you could possibly climb up the ladder. But most of you just do what you're doing. Love your country, follow the orders, eat the shit that we give you, and maybe when you die, you'll find yourself in paradise. Because this thing that's happening, this thing that is occurring, is a restructuring of feudalism back again. And it's all about putting that mythology back. It's going to be a new American God, if you will. That's what Christian nationalism is all about. And you'll notice that a lot of the people who are pushing this idea of Maga communism, a lot of them are converting to Catholicism. It's weird how that happens. Isn't it weird that the church that was enforcing orthodoxy all that time and feudalism and hierarchical power, isn't it weird that a lot of these people are moving away from, their old past as Marxist and leftists and all of that, and suddenly they're converting? because they feel hollow and they want to find meaning. And the next thing you know, they're kind of for that orthodoxy again. It's weird how that happens. It's weird how when you move away from conventional understanding of politics and you start going into the deeper politics, you start talking about material conditions, the actual beliefs and narratives and ideologies, and you start talking about the trends and cycles. It's weird how this stuff suddenly makes sense. And stuff that we're talking about here, something like Maga communism, which the first time I saw it, my head went, what? And then immediately I was like, oh yeah, this is absolutely this trend and this trajectory just playing itself out. Period. Period. Keith, when did the tattoos start? I look up one day and you're all inked. Like later in the pandemic when the vaccines started coming out, and I felt safe to do it. I wanted tattoos for a while. So I got tattoos, and there's that. I like them. I'm getting more, probably sooner than later. I think the next one is my left forearm. I think that's the next one to add to the one that I've got on my left forearm now. I'm probably going to add it out a couple of inches. That's probably next. I don't know where it's all going. I don't know what it's going to do. We'll see. I like them. All right. Long question here that's probably going to take us right. It's probably going to take us to the 60-minute mark, which is fine. And then we'll move past the 60 mark because we still have a lot of questions. I hope y'all are having a good time. I don't know if good time's the right word. We're talking about weird shit. We're talking about weird shit and drinking booze, which I have to tell you is one of my favorite things. I like to talk about weird shit. And a lot of the time, when I talk about weird shit, people get a look on their face and like, why are we talking about this? This is weird. Which is nice. I always get very excited when I get to talk to people and they want to talk about like these larger implications of things. That's always an exciting thing. And then there are just a lot of people who are just like, why are you talking about that? That's not fun. There's that. All right. Sarah Engender. There's a little bit of a jaunt. Hi. I live in South Georgia. I know the feeling. And I've organized a few rallies and protests and marches in support of reproductive rights. I am now in an apathetic funk, frustrated as although we had a good turnout at these events, it was really just Democrats all meeting up and felt like we were just preaching to the choir. I was hoping to get attention and women from across the aisle who may reach out to support us on such a critical issue, but no. I even wrote a post on my Facebook page about a week ago how I feel about the South, and we're over. I mentioned how not one Republican friend has reached out since the Dobbs decision, so yes, I think it's bonkers. Not one has said anything to me, even though they know I've been doing these events. Not a dicky bird. That's a hell of a phrase. As a Brit living in South Georgia with my hubby for the past 17 years, is there any point in all doing these rallies and marches if really the Republicans are a brick wall? Even the women in such an anti-woman climate today, it's like a cult. They just won't budge. So what do I do now? What can I do now? Maybe many of them felt the same as I do now and ended up towing the line, but seriously, women's productive rights are gone and still not a drop of support. What now? So, first off, before we get into the larger implications and my advice in this, and I think this isn't just about protest. It's not just about Dobbs. It's not just about politics. This is larger spiritual stuff, and we'll talk about this in just a second. But I want to go ahead and address one thing with the reproductive rights thing, and this is something I've talked about for a while. And this is something that I've been sounding the alarm on since the decision came down. Conventional politics told us that Roe v. Wade would never be overturned, and if it was, oh my God, there would be such an uprising that it wouldn't last. Like you would just see people in the streets every single day, and it wouldn't end. Then it happened. You saw some protests. You saw some people saying no, this is awful, and then all of a sudden it just dried up. And I think a lot of people have been absolutely shocked by this. They've seen the Democratic Party not really offer much of a solution to it other than go vote. On one hand, deep politics, this reflects material conditions. Because neoliberalism has exploited us with such incredible efficiency and power, people can't afford to have children. So as a result, birth rate has gone down, particularly And this is of the real concern in a lot of this. And Ross do that in his infinite wisdom, put it all on the line and basically said it's about white people. It's absolutely the concern there is the white population, the American white population. This is reflective of a larger thing that is happening, and this is the trend and the trajectory of where we're going. If we're not careful and if we don't fight this thing back and if we don't defeat this thing, I got to tell you, the America that we're going to see in 10 years is going to not resemble anything like what you imagined it would. Like it's going to roll back in a hurry. So there's that. That's why that has happened. I understand it's so frustrating. It pisses me off and it hurts me all the time. And a large part of it has to do with the fact that people with the largest soapboxes, people with the largest platforms, people who have political and cultural power, most of them live in so-called blue states where abortions are still legal, their rights have not been curtailed, and they look at red states and they look at the people there and they think, why don't those people leave? And there must be something wrong with them, and I'm not going to stick up for them. We have a balkanization problem in this country, which is one of the reasons why this is so tough. And the fact that they haven't outlawed abortion yet nationwide, that would be a problem. That's where you would actually see the protest in the street and like the mass civil disobedience. The fact that now it was left up to the states, and you're seeing Republican controlled states do away with the right, that is capitalized off of that balkanization, unfortunately. So here's a couple things, and I just want to say to Sarah, first off, congratulations on playing a role in this. This is absolutely an important thing, and organizing and bringing people together and being a hub for people is hugely important, and you should be commended for that. I understand the apathetic funk. In the early days when I was doing this gig, when I was doing my political analysis, and going back 2016, 2017, like even back in 2018, 2019, honestly, that stretch, I felt like at any given moment, if I tweeted the right thing, right? If I could just word the right tweet, like maybe it would help. If I wrote the best book that I could write, maybe it would make the difference. As I organized, as I talked to people, I spent a large part of my time online trying to talk to Maga people and going back and forth with them and being like, "Hey, get to know me. You'll understand that I'm not like some deep state shill or something like that, right? Then we can do something." And I had these I had years where I felt like if I just did the right thing and like maybe it would shift that. And then in the midst of all of it, and this was, I think, again, going back to the idea of like Western civilization and the way we look at this stuff, I I realized suddenly that I was looking at it the wrong way. It was important that on one hand, maybe maybe somebody somewhere would read something. I've heard American Rule and The Man They Wanted Me to Be. I heard that those two books have gotten people to look at things differently and move out of MAGA and do things. Like I've talked to people that those things have made a difference for, which was incredibly rewarding. Do not get me wrong. But also you are, as you're preaching to the choir, what you're doing is you're communicating to other people, you're not alone, right? Like things are really, really bad right now and things are happening, but you're not alone. And if you're not out there having those marches and you're not out there having those protests, it sends a silent message. And the silent message is, I know in the back of your mind, you know this is wrong, but look around you and other people don't know that it's wrong, or other people don't believe it's wrong. You must be the freak. You must be the problem. You had better just be quiet. So the first thing that this does is it sends a message. It sends a massive message which says, no, this is screwed up. This is bullshit. This is wrong. This is oppressive. This is exploitive. It says that things are not okay. So the first things first, we're gonna hit an hour and finish the bourbon in our glass and then pour some more because we're doing this. I've got a ton of questions. We're hanging out. Hopefully you'll stick with me. You're sending the message that this isn't okay, but there's more to it. There's way more to it, and we'll talk about that in just a second. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Cheers. Thank you, guys. That's good. That's good. I'm glad we do this. I appreciate you coming out. Yeah, let's get a little bit more in there. So, on top of telling people, guess what? Other people think it's wrong. Other people know that it's wrong. What you're also doing, and this is a major thing that has to change in American protesting, and this has been a problem. What I have noticed in the Dobbs decision and the reversal of Roe v. Wade, and before that BLM, this is a big thing that has to change. You'd hear that there was going to be a protest, right? The Roe v. Wade protest that I went to was going to be at the courthouse in town. I heard from somebody that it was going to be there, and of course I showed up there and did the protest. I went, we protested, we heard some people speak, and then that was it. And then it was like until the next time that the Republicans did something. We have to start building on protests. We have to start building and gaining solidarity. If you see that I'm willing to be out there and I see that you're willing to be out there and we both know it's bullshit and we both know it's wrong, we have to start getting to know each other. We have to start building networks with that. And quite frankly, as this thing gets worse, we need to start understanding if things are getting bad, things are getting violent, things are getting dangerous. If something goes wrong, I need to know that those people have my back and they need to know that they have mine. We need to start building these communities, and we need to start building these communities not just to go ahead and defeat this legislation and to roll back this oppression. We have to start building trust, solidarity. Absolutely. We have to start building something larger than individual protest and individual dissatisfaction. And here's the thing, Sarah, you undoubtedly have started doing that. You undoubtedly have gone ahead and showed people, oh, this Sarah person thinks this is bullshit. I think it's bullshit. We're on the same wavelength. We're not freaks. We are on the right side, and we have to be together on this thing. You probably have affected more people than you think that you have. And you probably changed the opinion of a couple of people. Because once we are starting to build these connections, all of a sudden it's not, oh my God, I hate, name it, Biden, Clinton, AOC, whatever. It's not all of a sudden something that's taking place in Washington, D.C. It's not just deep state shit. It's not just like these people up at the top that I see on Fox News. Suddenly my neighbors say this is wrong. And guess what? I know my neighbors. They've been kind to me. They've talked to me. We've helped one another. They think it's wrong. Maybe I need to take a look at my own ideas. Maybe I need to take a look at my relationship to the world. Maybe it's time for me to take a long look in the mirror and understand I might be in something that isn't good. And maybe it feels good, and maybe it sounds good, and maybe I enjoy the feeling of the hate that MAGA and authoritarianism and Fox News creates. But maybe something's off here because I'm noticing that some decent people that I know and I trust and I care about, that they're on the other side of this thing. Apathetic funk is a real thing. This is a terrifying moment. Western civilization tells us we have to have results. We might not see the end of this fight. And I say that with, I was talking about this a little bit with Sarah Kinzier. It was a really, really good conversation. I hope you heard it. Been thinking about it a lot since we had it. Like, we might not defeat this thing. I have a lot of hope. I think that we will. I think long term, I think we're going to roll back authoritarianism, and I think we'll find a new era of freedom. Really, truly do, and basic human decency. I think we'll get there. I by studying history and watching these cycles, I think we'll get there. We have to stop expecting things to happen so quickly and so directly, and I have a hard time with that. I have a hard time with that too. I know how that feels. But the apathetic funk, I think, happens as there's so much bad news and there's so much stuff going on. And, and as things get tougher and tougher and these trends and trajectories grow, we have to think, you know what, like, I'm doing the right thing here. I'm fighting the right thing. I'm pushing for the right thing. And maybe I won't find it. And maybe I won't see it. And maybe I won't experience it. And things might very well get tough. I mean, the next couple of years with climate change and diminishing resources and this system starting to fall apart, it's going to get gnarly. Even if things work out and even if something miraculous and wonderful emerges from it, I'm telling you, we're in the birth pangs of it. It's gonna get tough, and the only way that we're gonna make it through those tough, fallow periods is if we start trusting each other, and we start realizing that there's more to the world than immediate satisfaction, which is what consumerism told us and sold to us. And what did we have to mortgage away for, cheap immediate goods? We mortgaged away well-paying jobs. We mortgaged away the environment. We mortgaged away democracy. We mortgaged everything. And it's time we stop mortgaging that. It's time that we changed. Scott says America is going to sacrifice the entire global South. God, I hope not. Care Bear says, is this the year the Cherokee Nation finally gets their delegates seated in Congress? And here's what I have to say. No. And that breaks my heart. It really upsets me. Not only the way we treated the indigenous people, but the fact that they still don't have the representation. The treaties they were given haven't been honored. It's really, really disgusting. But I will say, you talk about things getting better. You talk about things actually like improving or progressing. It involves things like that. It involves understanding that America was built on genocide and oppression and exploitation. And the moment that that starts actually being dealt with, and it's more than land acknowledgements, even though land acknowledgements are important, it doesn't cost anything for a land acknowledgement. It's time, put up or shut up. You start treating these people with respect. So no, unfortunately, it's not. It's just not. Rich says, what are your thoughts on the feedback loop between congregations and religious leaders making each other more extreme? Leaders get more conservative to keep followers, and then other people adopt those ideas. Can this be stopped and or reversed? So I've been talking with a lot of religious leaders, preachers, the like. I've been talking with them because I've been very, very interested in watching how a lot of these pastors and preachers have looked up suddenly and they realized that their entire congregations were becoming radicalized and joining QAnon and or leaving to join Christian nationalist churches. And they didn't understand why it happened. And I'll tell you, I understand it. I understand it because I grew up in the evangelical church where, it's white supremacist rhetoric, conspiracy theories, New World Order bullshit that we're still dealing with now. That's why it happened, period. I do find measures of hope and terror in how they're dealing with it. One, I'm glad that a lot of these leaders are starting to understand, that there's a problem, that they're starting to understand that there's radicalization in their churches that need to be dealt with. And they get it. They get it that Christian nationalism is a problem. Like, for the longest time, they thought that, you can go ahead and praise the United States of America. You can go ahead and talk about American politics and culture, but also still have the idea that like Christianity is not a nationalistic project, even as they preach nationalistic ideology and rhetoric. But the fact that they're starting to wake up and get pretty terrified of this thing, that gives me hope. And the fact that they reach out to somebody like me who has been a critic of the dangers of extreme Christianity, that gives me hope. Every time I hear from them, and it's been numerous times now, I'm always a little surprised. I'm delighted. I'm um, I'm hopeful from it, but it's always surprising. When it comes though to why it makes me worry, I about said pessimistic. I'm not pessimistic. When it makes me worry is the lack of understanding of what has occurred, the consequences of why this happened. When it happened, it was about gaining political power and influence. The evangelical right in this country, it it was about power. It was about control. A lot of the people who made this deal with the Republican Party, they did it because they thought that culture had gone too far and it had become dangerous. And then after that, it all went downhill, and it went downhill in a hurry. They got everything that they wanted. They got a devil's bargain, and here they are. So do I think it can be undone? Yeah, I do. I've talked to a lot of people, not just religious leaders, but in terms of projects that I've considered taking on and I'm still considering taking on. Um, I'm starting to understand that a lot of religious leaders think there's a possibility for change, and they want change. They understand it. They're terrified. They're starting to hear stuff coming from their congregation that they never in 1,000 years would have imagined hearing from them. It was that lack of expectation that they're showing that's really troubling. I'll just say that. So I'm hopeful, but also worried. Chris C. Seeing how stoking rage and grievance is all the GOP is capable of, how likely do you think political violence will be this fall? I've seen a lot of black flags and seeing Patriot Front graffiti in my hometown. First of all, that's really screwed up that you're seeing Patriot Front graffiti. That's a lot. Black flags, for those who don't know, is a flag of no quarter, which means that your enemies don't deserve even the decency of being held hostage. Um, Unfortunately, there's going to be violence. I think what we've been seeing in Brazil, and we'll talk more about Brazil in just a second. I think what we're seeing in Brazil is a grisly preview of where things are going, as long as the right relies on conspiracy theories and attacks on democracy. There's no way to break that spell. There's just not. There's going to be violence, which I keep saying is not a reason to not attack it. It's not a reason to not prosecute Donald Trump. It's part and parcel of what's happening. Period. It's the way things are. So yeah, I think there's going to be violence. The question is, what is that going to look like, and what is November going to look like? And basically, you've already seen the playbook laid out, which is do not accept a loss. You don't have to. Why would you? Why would anyone accept a loss now? Why would anybody in the Republican Party ever say, "Yeah, I lost. Congratulations to my opponent. They won fair and square"? There's a reason for that. That basically forfeits your entire future in the Republican Party. There's absolutely no incentive whatsoever to just accept a loss. All right, we'll get to next question. We still got a ton of questions. This was a question heavy session, which I enjoyed that. It's nice. It's nice having that. It's nice hanging out. Nice seeing everybody. Hope everyone's doing well. All right. Dan Dawson, which is nice. It's nice to have an alliterative name. I will say, this is just a quick aside. It's really weird to have my name for multiple reasons. Multiple reasons. One, Jared. Multiple spellings. ARED, I believe, should be the default spelling, but of course, that's my own bias. Yates, I have to use because Yates Sexton, the race scholar, published before me, so I had to distinguish myself. It's weird to be named after a Clint Eastwood character on Rawhide, and everybody thinks it's some sort of like high-minded, like literary reference, and as a result, they think I'm some sort of a cultural elite. And Sexton's a weird name. Sometimes I forget how weird it is to have the name Sexton. People don't want to use it. People are weirded out by it. I have to spell it out to people, and they're like, Sexton? They always think it's Saxton. It's a weird name. An alliterative name like Dan Dawson. Not bad. Not a bad name. I don't know. I'm interested. Y'all like your names? I've always had a hard time with my names. It's always been a strange thing. I've tried all kinds of different names. I've done all kinds of different things with my names. I've gone by different iterations of it, and then the next thing you know, you go viral and you achieve like public notoriety under one thing. It's weird. It's very, very weird. Dan Dawson with a pleasing alliterative name. Dan Dawson's a strong name. Strong name. Good name. Is it even possible for Democrats to overplay their hand when it comes to campaigning about Roe? How could they go far, if at all? Go too far, if at all? Is it enough of a ground shifting issue already that they don't need to campaign on it? I had talked about this. I've been in contact with a lot of Democratic strategists, and it was one of those things where the debate for a while was whether they even needed to address it, because they said, everybody knows what happened. It's already settled. Look what happened in Kansas. Like, people are pissed off about this. Obviously, the numbers are in our favor for the Democratic Party. I I think that the Democratic Party has been way, way too conservative in this, in terms of pushing reproductive rights, especially as you're seeing things. Nick and I will talk about this on the next podcast episode. You're seeing like in places like Idaho where they're like, don't even talk about, you know, um, reproductive. Like, don't even talk about contraception. Like, don't even get into that. Like, no, they haven't outlawed it, but just like it is. The Republican Party has just absolutely like pushed the cultural battle in a whole new direction. So no, I think the Democratic Party has been way too conservative. I think literally every race should just be like, hey, they're not just coming for your abortion rights; they're coming for contraception. They're coming for gay marriage. They're coming for minimum wage. You name it, which we'll talk about more in just a second. But no, the Democratic Party, and Lisa says they need to step up and grow a spine. Thank God. Absolutely. Cheers to that. But the Democratic Party, even more so than the Republican Party, is absolutely held captive by their strategist and pollsters. They love it. They can't get enough of it. And why? Because the Democratic Party, since the late 1980s, and that's how long this trend has been, they have come to believe that all they are doing is chasing the absolutely mythological independent voter. That's all they're looking for. They go ahead and they make gestures towards suburban voters, particularly the professional managerial class, which, is a group of people that they're worried about authoritarianism, but they're more worried about it because it's uncouth. They say the wrong things, right? They're just they're not likable, right? They're not professional. And a large part of this is we have oh, Brian, I'll get into that in a second. Um they don't they're not particularly necessarily worried about changing much of anything. It's more about manners. And the Democratic Party has made it into a gesture type thing. Like, you don't want to see extreme, you don't want to seem extreme, you don't want to seem too left, which the Democratic Party isn't left at all. There's no such thing as the left in the United States of America. It's been effectively wiped out. If you want a left, you're going to have to build a left. But the Democratic Party is terrified about seeing too extreme or whatever, which is one of the reasons that they are, captives to their pollsters and their strategists. They tell them what they want to hear and then, tell them to play it safe. Brian says, asked me, have any popular conservative personalities attacked me? Oh, yeah. I've dealt with Shapiro quite a few times. There was a period of time, there were a while when I was like going into Trump rallies and things where like some major figures were just saying, "Oh, he's lying. He isn't, accurately portraying what's happening in these places." And then, then it stopped being just the thing people said in rallies. The next thing you know, it just is out in the open, just completely out in the open. But it's awful. If the life that I live, unfortunately, is it's living on a level where some of these people, the right wing personalities, are going to attack me, or a website is going to attack me, and then basically an army of like radicalized idiots are going to come after me, whether it's like stalking me, threatening me, showing up at my house in the middle of the night. Like that's unfortunately what this has created. And I'm far from alone in that. I mean, pretty much any personality that you've heard who criticizes right wing extremism, like they deal with threats all the time. It just so happened that, where I lived was very dense with it. So it's part and parcel of this. But to be a part of anything that actually criticizes this stuff, absolutely. It depends on getting the attention of really, really dangerous, disgusting people. I'll just say that. And I don't regret it. I've never regretted it. At some point or another, it just sort of became part of my life. But I don't know that I would be able to sleep at night if I didn't. I wasn't going to walk away from it. All right, I got 2 questions together. I'll read them at once. Northwest woman. Question: do you think Democrats will step up their game following Newsom's black eye approach to the GOP extremism and lies? Is the old guard at the DNC paying attention? Mar-a-Lago safe opener. What is one strong campaign slogan message that the Dems could use in solidarity against the GOP at the midterms? Maybe your listeners have suggestions. Should they go Biden, tiptoe, semi-fascist, Fetterman, funny humiliation, or Beto, direct lambasting style? So, a couple of things on that. One, Gavin Newsom, the rise of the governor, and I talked about this on the podcast, is indicative of the fact that power has moved from the federal level into the state level. And we have seen the federal government more or less depowered and neutralized and sort of quarantined away from representative government. And now it's moved to the governors. And Gavin Newsom understands that better than any other Democratic governor. His sort of aggressive, high profile battles with DeSantis and Abbott are very obvious. I think Gavin Newsom understands modern politics more than most. I don't like his politics all that much. I think that he understands sort of where the wind is blowing, so to speak. His politics aren't great. He looks good. He sounds good. He has good instincts on stuff, but his politics aren't necessarily great. They're very neoliberal, is what I would say. Everyone says the state of California is leftist. That's absolutely absurd. It's a neoliberal paradise. So that's what's going on with Gavin Newsom. And I think that what you'll probably see, and this is where we're at now. I think what we'll probably see is we'll see more people like Newsom as the old guard of the Democratic Party retires or moves on, which I think most of them, I think they'll die in their offices. I think that's the reality on the ground when it comes to the Democratic Party. The money is still controlled by Schumer and Pelosi. That there's still just a center of power that is not going to give up power within the Democratic Party until they absolutely have to, until something changes on the ground, which is one of the reasons that I always say that The pressure on the Democratic Party has to come from the grassroots and the people. I don't know if the Democratic Party can be saved. I don't know if the Democratic Party is the vehicle that is going to go after authoritarianism or fix things. I really don't know. I'm not sure. I don't. Right now, the way it's constituted, I don't see the Democrats becoming that. On the same note, like what trend do I think? I think when it comes to Fetterman's particular race, and Fetterman is a down to earth type of person, which I think the Democratic Party needs more of. The reason why people like him is because he's a real human being who just happens to be involved in politics. And going back to what Sarah asked about like bringing on these protests and stuff, we need to start finding people who are real people who are going to gain the trust of people through protest and organization and movement who will then run for office. And all of a sudden, it's like, oh my God, we've got real people who are doing things as opposed to political creatures and sickos. Like the people that we're being presented are not going to work on our behalf. Like a lot of them are wealthy fame seekers and or they're political operators. Like we need to start producing our own candidates as opposed to relying on a lot of these just idiots that the Democratic Party is trotting out. So Fetterman has a very particular situation. Mehmet Oz is absolutely ridiculous. He's figured out his weakness is humor. Um, I think Beto's attack of Greg Abbott. I don't know necessarily that Beto's going to win. I think Greg Abbott's going to be reelected more than likely. But I will tell you, Beto is running one of the most courageous campaigns that I've seen in a very long time. It's it's laying it all on the line. And what the Democratic Party has to do is they have to call this what it is. But here's the problem, and here's the reason why the Democratic Party can't attack this thing head on. Here's the reason why the Democratic Party and I think right now the smart money is on a divided government. It's on one of the parties controlling the House and one of the parties controlling the Senate. The problem is that the Democratic Party is only defending the institutions and status quo. They don't have a plan. They don't have a plan to change things, to change the material conditions on the ground. The only thing that they do, and this goes back to Manchin, and this goes back to the pandemic stuff, the only thing that they can do is to react to crises and to go ahead and give money and or resources whenever the financial world tells them it's okay. That's what they've got. That's all they've got right now, and everything else is just maintaining status quo. You have to change things. People know that this isn't working. People know this is falling apart, which is why a lot of them are listening to Donald Trump and a lot of them are listening to the right, is because they understand that things are starting to fall apart. But they need to offer an alternative, and they don't have an alternative right now. The choice that the Republicans have made is a choice between change and more of the same, and more of the same sucks. More of the same sucks. What the Democratic Party is offering, and by the way, the Democratic Party, this is like when you really wrap your head around this, it blows your mind a little bit. The Democratic Party at this point doesn't even have like a bill that they've created or a way that they would go ahead and codify Roe v. Wade into law. That's one thing. But even if they did, the only argument that they had is we need to return to the 2021 world. That's it. People are sick of the 2021 world. Change things. And a lot of people are like, I don't care if it hurts other people. Go ahead and change things. Make things better. And as a result, Republicans are the ones who are offering change. It's bad change. It's the worst kind of change. The Democratic Party is offering more of the same. They got to find something different. They got to move forward. All right, we got 1, 2, 3, 4. We got 5 questions left. So if you're getting a little antsy, we'll finish this up. We got 5 left. Bob. That's great, by the way. Bob. Listen to Bob. You called Trump a sin eater in your convo with Sarah Kinzier, and I just want to unpack that a little more. Sure. Sin eater is an old idea, which is you can pick. Oh, Lee, I've talked a lot about CNN going Fox Light. We'll talk about that here in just a second when I've answered this question. So a sin eater in the past was when a community would pick one person. and all of the problems of the community, the things that had gone wrong, the things that weren't good, they would go ahead and blame the sin eater for them, and the sin eater would be punished. They would be harassed, they would be harangued, sometimes they would even be sacrificed, right? Like, think about that, like the idea of sacrificing people in order to have a good harvest, right? um, Donald Trump is just a sin eater. Donald Trump, again, is a symptom. He's not the larger disease. Um, we look at Donald Trump, and when you look at Donald Trump, he represents the worst parts of American capitalist consumerist culture in one human being. The fact that he became president, it wasn't based on any talent or motivation or desire of his own. He rode the currents of history and our political trajectories to become president of the United States of America. To sit here and say everything that's wrong with this country is because of Donald Trump is absurd. That's absurd. Oh, if we can just get rid of him, everything will get back to normal. It'll get back to normal. Don't worry about it. Take care of Donald Trump and everything will be fine. Thanks, Liz Cheney. Thanks, Mitch McConnell. It's wonderful. It's not the problem. The problem is that this country, from the very beginning, was faulty and was exploitative. It lied constantly. It hurt people. It killed people. It ran against its own principles. And now we are at this accelerated portion with neoliberalism and exploitation and hypercapitalism. And it's not going to go away just because Donald Trump goes away or just because Donald Trump gets put in jail. It just isn't. Oh no, it's buzzing. It's buzzing? Oh no. Okay, can you still hear me? I've been doing this for an hour and a half. It's been fine. Lots of buzzing. Oh no. Lots of buzzing. Let's see if we can. All right, let's try and bring this thing around. Okay. So. All right. So we got a couple more questions, so we'll bring this thing in. So we're not gonna let this thing get us down. Tim says, what's going to happen in Brazil? It seems Lula is going to take the lead. There's probably going to be a runoff. No, Mike has been fine. What is now? Oh, hold on. Oh no. What are we doing here? Weird static. This is a gremlin feed at this point. An absolute gremlin feed. I swear. Let's see if there's anything new about this. Echo is sound here. I'm hearing. Okay. Let's see what we can do. Okay. Let's try to unlock the mic. Let's see what we can do.